This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. Today I'm joined from California by Nilang Gor. Nilang Gor describes himself as a molecular biologist. He is a molecular biologist, an activist, and a global citizen. And he's also the founder of Cultivate Empathy For All. And today we're going to be speaking about Nilang's ideas about the systemic racism inherent with the unsustainable animal agriculture industry.
When we talk about systemic racism, I think most times we actually focus on our justice system, our law enforcement system, but systemic racism is not only limited to that, right? Systemic racism actually pervades in each and every aspect of our society. And food is definitely a part of it. And I would say that it is least addressed in our society in terms of raising the awareness and then doing something to actually establish the racially and socially equitable food system across our communities. So yeah, that is really important. And I can actually talk about all different aspects, how it is interrelated with our socially and racially equitable communities. I can actually talk about that if you have specific questions.
Well, what I found quite fascinating and quite terrifying was the way that you have identified systemic racism throughout every single stage of animal agriculture as it exists today, and about your ideas about what kind of changes we can make to basically correct these mistakes that we're making right now. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love you to describe where you feel the systemic racism exists within these different stages of the animal agriculture industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And how I see it is in a linear fashion of where the food is being produced, right? Many times these foods are actually produced far away from where we live in our towns and cities and urban areas, right? And when I talk about the animal agriculture, the livestock industries, these are millions of animals actually staying in a very compact places. And with that, what it does is it generates tremendous amount of animal waste. It generates tremendous amount of air pollution, and the impact of those air water pollution in surrounding communities is something that consumers are never aware of, because on the food label we never actually see that, right? So that's why that's something that we need to understand, who's living across those livestock factory farms.
Yes.
And how they are actually being impacted. And one of the recent studies that actually just came out a few months ago, it actually talked about how just air pollution from livestock factory farms actually are associated with more than 12,000 deaths in those low-income marginalized.
This is from both waste lagoons, I'm guessing methane emissions as well, and all of that. And this would be in the communities surrounding CAFOs.
Absolutely, very, very true. So this is the concentrated feeding operations that we generally refer as factory farms. Right. And you're absolutely right. These are various types of different air pollution that is impacting the health of the communities that actually live close by to these factory farms.
Because these waste lagoons, they're normally sprayed onto fields nearby, right? So it's aerated. It becomes a particulate in the air, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what they do is they have a multiple football field large lagoons. They actually fill it up with all the animal waste, and it stays. And then you're absolutely right. Then they actually spray it in the open field. That definitely is a concern for air pollution, and absolutely that also seeps into the groundwater as well. And that's where actually we get the nitrite concentration and nitrite contamination of a groundwater. And where I am living, California, the dairy industry is huge over here.
Of course.
And several counties actually are impacted by higher level of nitrite contaminated waters. And those contaminated waters are often actually are within the low income and marginalized communities.
Excuse my ignorance here. Is the aeration of this waste product, is the science behind it to do with it's going to get enough ultraviolet to dissipate the pathogens that are contained within, or am I way off base there?
I think when we talk about the air pollution in factory farms, I think there's multiple ways it actually generates the air pollution, right? Yes. One of the ways is through their feathers, through their hair. Another way is spraying the animal manure. And when we are talking about spraying animal manure, we have to actually understand that it definitely has pathogens, what you actually described, right? And many times, the animals that actually live in factory farms, they're actually fed antibiotics. So yes. The pet we are talking about, many of them, they are actually antibiotic resistant. And so we are talking about highly pathogenic environment, and those pathogens are antibiotic resistant. And just recently, a report actually came out, and it talked about how more than 90% of the samples that were actually tested near the factory farms were actually contaminated with one of the antibiotic resistance that they actually screened for, which is tremendous to actually understand how it would be like living in that kind of environment where your water, your air, everything is contaminated.
And in your part of the world, in the States, you were saying that most of those communities around about these factory farms are Black and brown communities, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So the communities, so often we always talk about environment racism, right? And in terms of the food system, these CAFOs, these factory farms, are definitely not going to be located in wealthy communities, right? There are actually communities that's least addressed, that's marginalized. And so when they actually start producing animals at such a large scale, the environmental impact that it's going to have is definitely directly to the low-income marginalized communities. And that's where the animal agriculture is mainly associated with environmental racism, and especially in terms of the food production. The next step is where those animals are actually being slaughtered. And that I would love to talk about that more. So when animals are actually raised and then they're actually transported to this slaughterhouse and meatpacking facilities, the people who actually work over there are mainly low-income, marginalized, and people of color. And most times they are actually also immigrants as well, if yes. I talk about the United States, right? So we actually bring people from outside the countries to do these jobs. And in United States, these are the most dangerous jobs. It is the most dangerous occupation in the United States, and it averages 2 amputations per week.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and we are talking about the immigrants who don't even have the access to the healthcare.
Yeah.
And we actually putting them into the most dangerous jobs. And so that's where the next stage of the environmental racism in relation to the animal agriculture actually starts from. And these are the topics that let's talk about. Often we talk about animal welfare, which is really, really important. We talk about environment degradation, that's also very important. But I think what we don't talk about is how this animal-derived food production is associated with environmental racism and systemic racism. And that's why it's really important to understand where our food comes from.
Well, after reading a lot of your thoughts on this, it became apparent to me. I could really see why you were equating this with modern day slavery.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because there are several aspects of the meatpacking industry that's actually kind of very resembles to the slavery in terms of we are bringing people from outside the country.
Yeah.
We are actually putting them into the most dangerous occupation without the healthcare. And then they are at-will employees, meaning that if they fail to actually meet the higher line speed, meaning how many animals you can kill and process, then they are going to be threatened with deportation, right? So we are really creating a very controlled and hazardous situations for people. And these people are actually even brought outside the country. These are the people who are low income, marginalized people of color. And so that's why, to me, when I look at all the information in front of me, it resembles to me with slavery.
Yes, no, I understand that entirely. Um, you also, in one of your interviews, you brought in the working conditions within a slaughterhouse, and you were speaking about with the spread of COVID that happened throughout these slaughterhouses, a lot of these employees, of course, had no health coverage whatsoever, what with it being the United States, of course. Please speak a little about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when we talk about the health coverage for the employees who work in meatpacking industry, it's definitely not comparable to anything that we are used to seeing. And already the industry is such a hazardous in terms of the physical and psychological damage that it does to an individual.
Yes.
I haven't much spoken about the psychological at all. But when you put a global pandemic on top of it, when the people are actually working shoulder to shoulder for hours and hours, that's definitely the ideal situation. That is the incubator where you actually spread disease frequently. And that's why in United States, the meatpacking industry actually played a huge role in transmission of the COVID-19.
You mentioned the psychological impact of spending these incredibly long, arduous shifts committing violence against animals and how that spills over into the surrounding communities.
And that's something that even Liz talked about, right? Because what we focus on is the physical health, but
Yeah.
what we often forget about is the psychological damage. And 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 there's really good research material out there that I read and I try and write about it. And what they talk about is um, we are asking the meatpacking workers to actually create two separate worlds. The one world where nonviolence, where morality is really important when they step into the human society, when they
Yes.
step into their occupation, which is slaughtering animals. We want them to actually put down all their moral values, right? So that separation, that divide does not actually work. And what it does is that it actually blends with one another. And when it actually blurs the line of a separation, that's where we have a spillover effect. And that spillover effect most times is also associated with or identified with a form of a PTSD, where you are actually completely traumatized with your occupation. And when you step into the human society, you are now actually bringing the trauma that you have actually experienced in your occupation into this society.
And in the States, we've not even brought in the factor of the prison workforce that is utilized in many of these slaughterhouses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's another aspect of who's actually doing this work, right? And we talked about immigrants, the people of color, low-income families. Another thing is prison labor. So in a prison labor, they have a program where they actually make money, and it's really less amount of money. And when we ask them to actually do this hazardous work, it definitely brings more psychological trauma, more physical harm. And the thing is, we want to create a system where our prison system is more rehab based. But
Yeah.
what we are doing over here is we are exposing them to the violence, right? So we are actually moving completely in the opposite direction just in order to support the society. So that's definitely another area that we need to actually talk about of how the animal agriculture and the meatpacking industry uses the prison labor.